In Hawaii, on the island of Oahu, nestled on the slopes of Makiki, there lies a not-so-famous yet significant resting place, the Makiki Cemetery, and it's a part of old Hawaii that I have been visiting for over 50 years. My first recollection is when my grandfather passed away in the mid-1960s. Because I am of Japanese descent, a Buddhist service was held here for his interment. The Makiki Cemetery is literally located in the very heart of Honolulu. As a child, I had mixed emotions about being here. On one hand, well, it can be a little scary. When you see the old gravestones, a child's brain can conjure up images of a scary movie. But yet, it's also very peaceful. I didn't realize just how much history was contained between these old rock walls, particularly for my family and the Japanese community, until I got a little older. Now for the disclaimer. I'm doing this partially from memory, so some facts may not be 100%. And of course, I don't wish to offend anyone. I also want to be clear that the Japanese section that I'm describing is only a portion of this cemetery. During the mid-1960s, Honolulu was undergoing a huge building boom. The old Hawaii that my father knew as a boy was starting to give way to a modern city. I remember Makiki as an area where there were big homes of Kama'aina families, and many of those old houses of old Hawaii were being torn down to build high-rise condos. I seem to remember the Makiki Cemetery was somewhat of a casualty because it was made a bit smaller to accommodate the surrounding construction of the time. At the rear of the cemetery is the more modern hollow tile, rather than the original rock that can be seen throughout the entire cemetery. The Makiki Cemetery is the oldest and largest of Hawaii's state cemeteries. It was established in 1877 to accommodate Native Hawaiians, but was later opened to other ethnic groups, one of them being the Japanese. About 9 years before the establishment of the Makiki Cemetery, in 1868, the first wave of Japanese immigrants came to Hawaii. The Yamaguchi Prefecture of Japan was a large part of the first wave. This may be the reason why many of the older headstones bear the prefecture of origin as Yamaguchi. Here are 3 monuments, which I consider the centerpiece of the Japanese portion of the Makiki Cemetery. The first one was erected in 1927 by the Japanese Friends of Hawaii. A portion of it reads, "About 70 years ago, in 1868, or the first year of the Meiji era, there arrived in Hawaii some 150 Japanese. They were the first immigrant group from Japan. Although castaways had drifted to these shores in earlier times, this group was called the Ganen Mono because they came here in the Meiji Ganen, or the first year of the Meiji. Some of them returned to their native land, while many others passed away in these islands." In 1986, through the efforts of the United Japanese Society, the monument on the right was erected to honor the Japanese who passed during the early 20th century without descendants. The remains were gathered from unkept and broken graves at the Makiki Cemetery, then placed here. This monument is made from stone from Japan's Okayama Prefecture. The monument directly in the center is the first Japanese naval grave site that was established outside of Japan. It was founded, I believe, in the mid-1890s, before Hawaii was even a U.S. territory. Now, my father once told me that the original reason for it being here was that at the end of the 1800s, a Japanese Navy ship arrived on a training mission. While in Hawaii, many of the sailors died of some kind of illness and were interred here. A portion of this plaque reads, The Makiki Japanese Cemetery, on whose grounds this memorial is erected, is the oldest Japanese cemetery in the state and has since its founding the first year of the Meiji, 1868, served as the epitome of the proud history of the pioneer Japanese immigrants in Hawaii. Part of the ground has served as the official grounds for men of the Japanese Navy who died during their separate visits to Hawaii. The Makiki Cemetery is a historic treasure of old Hawaii, and I'm only glancing the surface of the history that it contains for all races who are laid to rest here. I've always admired the courage, even the desperation it must take to go thousands of miles from your home, where a different language is spoken and a completely different form of writing is used. The many stories that gave reason for this journey must be complicated, interesting, and probably heartbreaking. Although Hawaii is separated from the U.S. continent by an ocean, much of the history within the cemetery is uniquely American.